Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I have my Game Week 21 team selection. I've got 5 flagged players and only 1 free transfer. If you do get any use out of today's video and you do enjoy it, please smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So jumping into my Game Week 21 team selection, and the team is an absolute disaster, but I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So let me know, first question I want to ask you for today's video, let me know down below in the comments, how many flagged players do you have? It's probably, even in a lot of your cases, worse than my 5, but I do feel like I've got quite unlucky with a couple of these, but we'll discuss throughout. The other unfortunate thing is I only have 1 free transfer. And the reason that is so much more unfortunate is one of my transfers last week was to bring in Trent, who got a 0-pointer and is now injured. And if I didn't make that move, I would not only have Trippier, who is at least available despite the tricky fixture, but I would also have 2 free transfers and I'd also have a bit more money in the bank. So in hindsight, I wish I hadn't made that move, but obviously I couldn't anticipate what would happen with Trent. And if he didn't pick up the injury, then I wouldn't even be discussing the fact that it was a bit of a mistake. So I'm not going to overthink that one, but the team isn't in a great position. We'll discuss all of that today. As always, we're going to take a look at my team before any transfers have been made. And I'm recording this late on Wednesday, around midnight on Wednesday. I was very tempted to make a transfer on Wednesday evening, but I think I've decided not to do that and just accept that price rises and price falls could happen in my team. And I'll probably make my final transfers on the deadline stream. But I'll discuss after we look at my team in its entirety what my current transfer plans are. I'm almost definitely taking a -4 hit. Starting with the goalkeepers. Just fingers crossed everything's fine with Areola ahead of the deadline. I think it will be. Areola against Sheffield United away is a decent fixture, but I'm almost not expecting a clean sheet for West Ham because they have so many injuries. And yes, most of their injuries are to their attacking players, but when your entire front 3 is essentially missing, your ability to apply pressure to the other team and also hold the ball in attacking positions is going to be a lot more difficult. Also, if your attacks score goals, psychologically that affects the opposition. They're less likely to attack, or maybe they'll feel demotivated. Let's say West Ham went out and scored 2 or 3 goals against Sheffield United in the opening half. A clean sheet is probably even more likely then. I think this is a game where Sheffield United could get a result here. So, on paper, it is a good fixture, but I'm not necessarily expecting a 4th clean sheet in a row for Areola. But it's definitely not a priority position at the moment. Even if Areola wasn't available, the fact that I've got Dubravka there, it still probably isn't a priority position. This week, we really need to think about where do you want to prioritise your transfers. And for me, the goalkeeper spot is probably not one of them. Moving on to the defence, and yes, we all knew that Salah and Son wouldn't be available this week, but the defence is where I've really been let down because I've got 3 flagged players, and in all honesty, I've got a feeling none of those 3 will feature. I'll firstly discuss the 2 that are available because, of course, they are not going to be leaving my team. That is Porro and Gabriel. I don't even really need to discuss if they're fantastic options because they have to play for me. But for what it's worth, if I were on a wildcard, I would definitely have Gabriel. And I still think at his price, Porro may still be worth it due to the attacking threat that he carries. And once Romero's back, which could be as early as the Manchester United game, that is a massive boost. They're obviously picking up defenders in the January transfer market as well. There is the possibility for clean sheets too. So both Porro and Gabriel, fingers crossed they are available. It at least gives me 2 defenders. And then, of course, I will be only playing 3 defenders. So on paper, I only really need to bring in 1 defender, assuming none of these 3 play. Or I could even, fingers crossed, one of them plays and just not make a defensive transfer. Because Pau Torres and Taylor are both still, at the time of me recording, in contention. They haven't been fully ruled out. I'm going to discuss Taylor first. The reason for that is the Burnley-Luton game has been moved from the Monday to the Friday, and the Burnley game is therefore now the early kickoff. Do I think that we're definitely going to get early team news around Burnley? No. But is there a possibility on the deadline stream we will get early team news? Absolutely. And therefore, I probably will hold out for that, because if Taylor is available and we know that he's starting, there's a chance I don't need to make the defensive transfer. Yes, my bench will be very, very weak if the other 2 defenders don't play, but it at least gives me a starting defender. And to be honest, I'll be happy starting Taylor against Luton at home. Again, as I said with Areola, not necessarily that I expect a clean sheet, but on paper it is a decent enough fixture. So Taylor, I probably won't be selling anyway, but it may influence whether I decide to make a defensive transfer or not if we get early team news around whether Taylor starts. Pau Torres is a tricky one because as far as I'm aware, he has not been in full team training. It sounds like he re-aggravated his injury and they almost rushed him back a little bit too quickly. And the reason for that was that Longley didn't feel well and he had to come on. So I have a feeling that they might not rush him back this time, and they may just give him one extra fixture to fully recover and make sure that he doesn't re-aggravate that injury, because they don't want him to pick up a recurring injury. And you have to remember, between their Game Week 21 and Game Week 22 fixture, Aston Villa have a bit of a break, and it may therefore be that they decide not to rush him back into this one, give him a full break, make sure he's fully recovered, gets a lot of team training under his belt, and then that's when he comes back in. So my initial assessment is only a prediction. I haven't seen anything that makes me believe this more so than others, but my initial assessment is that Pau Torres probably isn't available for Game Week 21. The frustrating thing is, as I spoke about briefly there, is Game Week 21 is spread across 2 weekends, and Aston Villa actually play on the first weekend. If Aston Villa played on the second weekend, I would think there's a more of a chance of Pau Torres being available and starting, but Aston Villa play on the 14th, which is this Sunday. So my early assessment is that I have a feeling both Taylor and Pau Torres won't be available. Pau Torres, I think, has a lower chance of being available. Taylor, I'm slightly more optimistic, but it may be that I just don't find out before the deadline. So if I don't have those two available, and then we finally move on to Trent, and Trent has basically been confirmed out for Game Week 21. It's not been he 100% won't play, but it pretty much has. The quotes coming out is that he's unavailable for... There was one quote which said 3 weeks, and then there was another quote which said a few weeks. There are lots of differing opinions on this. My initial interpretation of the quotes was that it's not looking great, and there's a chance he's back in a few weeks if he's fully recovered. Other people seem to think there's nothing big there. Maybe they're overplaying it slightly, and he'll absolutely be back for Game Week 22. I think it depends on the way that you want to frame it, but I would be surprised if he features in Game Week 21. The thing to note, though, is Liverpool play on the second weekend of Game Week 21. So Liverpool's fixture is on Sunday, the 21st of January. So there is 11 days between now and when Liverpool play. Maybe he does make a recovery and maybe he is available. Maybe it's worth starting him, but I think that is very unlikely based on the quotes that I currently have available to me on Wednesday evening. So I think the most likely thing is he definitely misses Game Week 21. Then whether he's available for 22 or 23, we're not sure. But do remember that 22 is a midweek deadline, and therefore Game Week 23 is the weekend after that. So there's only like 3 days between their midweek fixture and then their weekend fixture. So if a player misses Game Week 22, there is a very good chance they also miss 23. So it may be that we don't actually get Trent back until 24 at the earliest. It's a lot of hypothesizing. I don't really know. And that's why it is difficult to sell Trent, right? Because if Trent is only out for the Bournemouth fixture and he's back in 22, yes, the fixtures against Chelsea and Arsenal in 22 and 23 aren't ideal. But beyond that, they have Burnley in 24 and then they have a possible double in 25. You're probably going to want Trent for those fixtures. So it is a very tricky position to be in. The other reason, though, that you might want to sell Trent, and I'll kind of discuss this when I look at my transfer plans, is selling Trent may, in some cases, allow you to keep Salah whilst also picking up Haaland in Game Week 22. And it looks like Haaland is nearing a return, and I would expect him to be back in Game Week 22. So, yes, I don't want to sell Trent. Yes, I would love him for Game Week 24 and a possible double Game Week 25, but you're also going to want Salah, and you're definitely going to want Haaland. And it may be difficult with some of the other players that you want, such as Watkins and Saka, to have Trent, Salah and Haaland. I don't think you can get all of them in. So is it worth sacrificing an injured Trent, who we don't know when he'll be back, to allow you to potentially keep Salah on the bench, which will make it easier then, obviously, when Salah returns, to have him back in your team? It may well be worth doing so. And therefore, at the moment, I am ever so slightly edging towards selling Trent, but I guess it doesn't have to be in 21. And that's the thing we'll discuss when we move on to my transfer plans is, yes, it probably does make sense to sell Trent instead of Salah if you have to sell one of them, but it doesn't have to be in 21. You could actually keep both Trent and Salah on the bench for Game Week 21 and then sell one of your other players, such as a Son, or in my case, Pau Torres or Charlie Taylor, keep Trent and Salah, and that would just give you another couple of weeks to decide which of the two you want to sell. Because let's say Salah picks up an injury in AFCON and you want to sell Salah anyway, great, it means I can keep Trent. Maybe Trent's only out for 1 week and Egypt look amazing and we think, you know what, Egypt are probably going to make the final if they carry on like this. Then again, maybe you want to remove Salah and keep Trent. So I feel like just giving you an extra couple of weeks, which it will do because Game Week 22 isn't for a few weeks now, it will just give you a little bit more time to assess which of the two, if either, you want to sell. Maybe Haaland isn't back and you decide you don't want to sell either. I just think there is a lot that can change between Game Week 21 and 22. So it does make sense to sell Trent, and I am leaning towards selling him at some point, but I'm just wondering, can I delay that until 22? If I want to bring in a defender this week, which I probably am, could I maybe sell Pau Torres instead? In your position, is there another player that you could sell to allow you to bench Trent and Salah? I think if you can get away with it, and you don't feel like it's too passive, it may benefit your team in the long term, and you're structuring your strategy to just delay the Trent and Salah decision by one more week. I will discuss my favourite defenders to bring in, to either replace Trent or, for me, replace Pau Torres and bench Trent. It's fairly obvious who my top few are, but we'll discuss that when we move on to my watch list. So just to recap that section, Porro and Gabriel, fine. I'll only be playing 3 defenders this week anyway. If Taylor is confirmed as available, maybe I don't need to make a defensive transfer, but I would still be tempted anyway, because let's say Taylor is available and I still make a defensive transfer, well then great. It gives me Taylor first sub. If any of my other players miss out, which they could across a 2-week game week, then great, I've got Taylor first sub, and it probably makes sense to try and have at least one substitute. Hopefully that section wasn't too confusing. Let's move on to the midfield 4. Moving on to the midfield, and again, because of the amount of issues we have in our team, I feel like it's not really worth discussing in tons of detail the players that are just available and that you know are probably, at the moment at least, fine. And the 3 midfielders that I have outside of Son and Salah, in all honesty, I think I would have them on a wildcard. I think Saka, Foden and Palmer are arguably the best 3 midfielders to own in FPL at the moment. I would say that Saka and Palmer are probably my 2 favourite captaincy options, and lots of people looking to bring in Foden this week. So I am very happy with them, but even if I wasn't happy with them, at least they're fit. And I think you really do need to prioritise in weeks like this. So Saka, Foden and Palmer not going anywhere. Just on captaincy, I'll discuss this in more detail in the deadline decisions video on Friday. But for me, when I'm looking at captaincy, I value minutes, and I think both Saka and Palmer are pretty nailed on to start. I value a good fixture, preferably at home. I think they've both got a good fixture at home. I value penalties as well, and I value good underlying data. The 2 of them have all of that in abundance. So Saka and Palmer for me are equally good options. I've just got a bit of a gut feeling this time, which I haven't had a lot recently, about Saka. I feel like his data recently has been some of the best that we've seen in the Premier League for him. I mean, it is better than we've seen when he's been returning lots in the past, but unfortunately his returns have slowed down, but the data is still there. And whilst I don't think players are ever due in FPL or due in Premier League, you don't say a player is due a goal. Like, that makes no sense, right? You don't accumulate XG that all leads to a goal. Every game is fresh. But what I would say is I think he's been unlucky not to return more recently. Arsenal haven't had a penalty for a while in the Prem as well, and Saka is still first choice penalty taker. He's on set pieces too. I just feel like this is a good fixture. And Crystal Palace defensively this season have been a bit hit and miss. And I think if you catch them in the right fixture, and Arsenal are better at home, I feel like there could be a few goals in this for Arsenal and for Saka. So it's just a bit of a gut feeling for me, but I could end up switching to Palmer. I do think for me in my team, those are probably the 2 standout captaincy options. I think Foden is fine, but for me, due to the lack of penalties, the lack of set pieces, the fairly average underlying data, nowhere near as good as Saka and Palmer this season, for me, Foden isn't an option alongside those 2. When it comes to Son and Salah, I think I've pretty much committed to keeping Salah this week. I haven't considered any transfer plans, unless Haaland is suddenly available for the weekend and we know he's going to start, which I don't think either of those things will be confirmed, then I won't sell Salah this week. The reason for that is Liverpool have a probable, again, not confirmed, probable double in 25 if they reach the EFL Cup final, because they'll blank in 26 and that fixture in 25, that fixture in 26 against Luton will be rescheduled to 25, which will give Liverpool a double of Brentford and Luton. I would argue, even if Man City also have a double in that week, that Salah is probably the best captaincy option, and I would probably triple captain him. I think that, as I said, it's very difficult to get Trent, Haaland and Salah alongside the likes of Saka and Watkins and Darwin and all of these other players that you might want to own, maybe some other decent defenders, unless you've got an exceptional team value. So I think I have to sacrifice one of them. If I end up selling Salah but keeping Trent and then moving to Haaland, what is my route back to Salah? It's not going to be particularly easy. It might be 2, 3, 4 transfers if the money's spread around a bit, or I might end up having to sell Trent anyway, or a player like that anyway. So why not just avoid doing that, keep the Salah spot in my team, and then have him in place when he comes back? Because I don't need him. If I sell Son, I have 7 other attackers and I have defenders I can play. I don't need that Salah spot in my team, especially with the fact that I think a lot of the midfielders, really, I thought there would be so many good replacements for Son and Salah, but there are lots of replacements, but I'm not overly interested in any of them. So At the moment, I'm planning on keeping Salah. I think that makes the most sense. And I think just at least having an extra couple of weeks to reassess is worth it. Again, if Salah gets injured, I'll sell him. If Salah if Egypt look really good and we think they'll definitely make the final, and maybe they don't have double game week 25, we think that's less likely, then again, maybe I will sell Salah. I have that option always, but I don't think I need to do it this week. I don't think there's much benefit to me doing it this week. With Son, there is no upcoming double for Spurs. Even if Chelsea and Spurs is a blank in 26, that will probably not go into game week 25. So all we know for Spurs is no upcoming double and a probable blank in game week 26. And I say if, Chelsea turn it around in the second leg against Middlesbrough. If that isn't the case, well then yes, Spurs won't blank and Chelsea won't blank. However, they still don't have an upcoming double. And whilst the fixtures aren't bad for Spurs, I think you can cover Son by getting a Richarlison, getting a Maddison at some point. There are other players that aren't anywhere near as expensive as Son that I think cover the same fixtures and the same attack. So for that reason, just to recap that, Saka, Foden, Palmer, absolutely fine. No need to take any of them out of my team. Captaincy will be on Saka or Palmer most likely. Out of Son and Salah, who I'm most likely to sell, it is Son for me. So kind of what we've seen so far, I'm likely to make a defensive transfer. I'm likely to also remove Heung-min Son, which is already a -4. Let's take a look at the 3 forwards and discuss if any of them are going to be changed over. So the short answer to my question around, am I going to change any of the 3 forwards, is probably no, right? Watkins, Alvarez and Darwin all away. By the way, most of my team is playing away from home this week, which probably isn't ideal, but all of them away. And you could argue that none of these are particularly good fixtures, right? Newcastle, whilst they've not been great recently, that is still a very tricky fixture to go away to Newcastle. Everton have been decent at home this season. A bit hit and miss recently defensively, but Aston Villa aren't particularly good away from home. And Bournemouth have been very, very good this season. And again, over the last 6 to 8 defensively, exceptional. So none of these 3 stand out to me, in my opinion anyway, as the best captaincy option. And no, they don't have the best fixtures on paper, but again, they're not major issues because I have so many other real issues to deal with, especially the injured players in Son and Salah. So I guess I don't need to talk about them in tons of detail, but I do need to make a decision in game week 22 around which of these 3 I sell to get Haaland back. If I decide to sell Trent to get to Haaland, I can't sell Alvarez because I don't have the funds to get there. I would need like a £3.5 million defender. So unless I sell Salah, it has to be Watkins or Darwin that makes way for Haaland. And the obvious answer to that is Darwin. But if Darwin does well against Bournemouth, maybe let's say Darwin gets a penalty, or Liverpool get a penalty against Bournemouth, and Darwin takes it, converts, maybe gets another return. I'm going to find it very difficult to sell Liverpool's penalty taker with good underlying data in what I would say pretty good form for Darwin. He looked brilliant again in the EFL Cup semi-final when he came off the bench, got 2 assists, could have had a goal as well. I feel like Darwin is about to go on a nice run, and I've been saying that since game week 8, but I feel like it is coming for Darwin. So I'm going to find it tricky to sell him, but I don't think you can reasonably sell Watkins ahead of Darwin. The ideal scenario would be sell Alvarez, but I just can't do that unless I sell Salah or unless I take a -8. So it's going to get a bit messy, but just to say for this week, I think the 3 forwards are fine. I know some people are potentially looking at captaining Watkins, Alvarez, Darwin. I've spoken about in the past why, for me, I think there are always, on paper, slightly better options than Watkins, simply just because of the penalties, the lack of set pieces, and also his underlying data is good but not excellent. And especially away from home, I don't think Villa are particularly good. So I think there are better options than Watkins, especially this week. And Alvarez and Darwin, yes, Alvarez is probably on penalties in the absence of Haaland. We think he will continue to be so. And Darwin, we think there is a good chance. He's taken 13 penalties in his career and he scored all of them, including 1 this season in Europe for Liverpool. So there is a chance Darwin's on penalties too. We don't know that with Darwin though. And I would argue that the fixtures, whilst they're not terrible, they are more difficult than Palmer against Fulham and Saka against Palace. On top of that, Saka and Palmer are both definitely on penalties. Saka's first choice. We think Palmer, I suppose they're not definitely going to take the penalties, but we expect them to. The underlying data is very good. And for midfielders, extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet. It's much easier for a midfielder to haul than a forward. So for me, I just think Saka and Palmer edge it in comparison to Alvarez and Darwin, at least in my opinion. But in any given week, you just never know. So trust your gut feeling. But for me, Saka and Palmer are leading the way for captaincy. So just to recap that before we move on to my watch list and then look at what my team may look like after my transfers, I would ideally just like to make the one free transfer this week. That was always the plan, was just to do one of Son and Salah, which is now confirmed as Son for me due to the reasons that I listed. So just sell Son for a midfielder of choice, which was going to be Bowen before the injury, and then leave the rest of the team because it was looking really, really good on paper. I had two decent subs in Powell and Taylor, but obviously now that three of my defenders have picked up injuries, Trent looks almost definitely out for 21. Powell, Torres and Taylor we think will probably be out, although one of them could be available. Again, I'm recording this on Thursday or on Wednesday evening, Thursday early morning, I suppose. And so therefore, I'm probably going to be forced to make a defensive transfer, either to field 11 players if Pau Torres and Taylor are both out, or if one of them is available, maybe just give me a decent first sub. So if I were to bring in another defender, I could either start them ahead of the other one that's available, or just put them on the bench, because the fact that this FPL game week is across 2 weekends now, anything could happen in that time frame. And I think having at least one sub feels pretty decent on paper. So I think the current plan at the moment is to remove Son and probably Pau Torres. And the reason for that is I just want an extra week to decide about Trent and Salah, because I don't know which I want to sell, if either or both. I think a lot will depend on whether Haaland's available, what happens with Salah at AFCON, what is the latest information around blank game week 26 and double game week 25. All of that information will be helpful, and also Trent's injury himself. So I think I want to keep the both of them. So Son and Pau Torres to a midfielder of choice and a defender of choice. So let's now take a look at my watch list. So taking a look at my current watch list, here are the players that I'm considering bringing into my team. And as I said, it is probably going to be a defender and a midfielder. But just a quick shout out to the forwards. I think there are a good few forward options that I don't currently own at the moment. Solanke being one that I still think is a good option. Still got a double game week at some point, which we don't know where that will go. Great underlying data. And whilst the fixtures aren't perfect over the next few, I still feel like he's a good option. The new options, though, that are emerging, João Pedro has been looking very good recently. We know his data's good. We know he's on pens. And the Brighton fixtures coming up are so good. It's the reason that I'm considering 2 other Brighton players to bring into my team. It's just these minutes aren't completely secure. But if you are looking for a forward to bring in, he's so cheap. It may well be worth the risk. And then Ivan Toney is another player that, just coming back from his suspension, we don't yet know what he'll look like. He recently scored a hat-trick, I think it was for the reserves, whilst he was getting his match fitness up. He is a born goal scorer. He'll be on penalties, and he will get you returns. It's just how many minutes can he play, and how quickly will he acclimatise to the Premier League again, and will he stay at Brentford as well? These are all the things that we don't know. I think there are other places to prioritise, and Haaland is going to be a priority probably in game week 22. Let's see if there's a chance if he's available for 21, but probably for game week 22, and therefore we need to start thinking about bringing him into the team. But as I said, a defender and a midfielder feel like the priority at the moment. For the defence, there are loads of really, really good options, but for me, I've narrowed it down to 3, which is Walker, Estepinian, and Doty. Walker is great because clean sheets I do think will be quite likely, especially given the fact that I think they've struggled for clean sheets in the first half of the season, but the data hasn't been that bad defensively. And there's always tends to be a time where City just turn it up a gear. And maybe they won't do that this season, but I feel like it may well be the case. And on top of that, as well as decent chance for a clean sheet, he's been very nailed, and City will probably have a double in either game week 25 or game week 28. And therefore, having Walker for a double game week, he started every game this season in the Premier League. He feels like a decent safe transfer in, but he is quite expensive and he doesn't carry much attacking threat. So I think my favourite 2 options at the moment are Estepinian and Doty. I just think with the Luton defender, the chance for clean sheets just isn't really there. They may keep the odd clean sheet, and to be honest, the fixture in game week 21 is one of the better ones against Burnley. It's really the attacking threat that you own him for. And if Liverpool do progress to the EFL Cup final, Luton will have 2 double game weeks in the foreseeable future. They'll have one against Liverpool, fixture to be rearranged, and also the fixture against Bournemouth. So 2 double game weeks, attacking threat, really good from set pieces, with the set pieces. He is really nice at 4.5, but I want Estepinian. The attacking data is always brilliant. Even if he's not playing at left wing back and he's playing at left centre back, which he has done a couple of times recently, he's still a great option. He scored 2 goals in his last 3 games. He kept a clean sheet as well. Brighton actually have been decent defensively this season. They're mid-table for expected goals conceded. They're not as bad as the clean sheet suggest. And the fixtures coming up are so, so good, especially over the next 3, but also across the next 6. There is very little to dislike about Estepinian. He's looking fit. He's looking good. I really fancy bringing in a couple of Brighton assets, and I want to start with Estepinian. So for me, the most likely transfer in defence is Pau Torres to Estepinian. And then when we look at the midfielders, I've tried narrowing it down to my 4 favourite options. And I did discuss Salah and Son replacements in a lot of detail in my Game Week preview video. You can go watch that. That was released yesterday. And I talk about, I think it was like 18 minutes, that section where I talk about the replacements. Richarlison, Garnacho, Gross and Eze. And if there weren't the worries around Timo Werner and his minutes, especially when Maddison and Son are back as well, and also the fact that he has been prone to some early subs, Richarlison is just comfortably the best option for me. His data is so much better than any of the other options we're looking at. His XG is just through the roof. And on top of all of the brilliant data, he's also likely to be on penalties in the absence of Son. So, like, there is very little to dislike about Richarlison, other than the fact that Werner coming in may take some minutes off him, especially once Maddison's back. And then when Son comes back, let's say he comes back from Asian Cup a little bit earlier than we think, maybe game week 23, then Richarlison could be an issue as soon as 2 or 3 game weeks away. But I think it's a risk I'm willing to take. And I think even once Werner comes into the starting 11, which could be against United, I think it will be Kulusevski in the 10 because Lo Celso's injured. I think it will probably be Johnson maybe pushed out to the right, Richarlison on the left or Werner on the left, and then the other one through the middle. So I even think if Werner starts at the moment, given the injuries they have, and given the fact that Maddison and Son still aren't available, I still think Richarlison starts. So for me, I am still leaning towards the Brazilian. But if I don't go there, I've got 3 cheaper options because it just makes it easier for me to get Haaland back in whilst also keeping Salah. And when I'm talking about the best option that makes it the easiest for me, and is genuinely right up there for me at the moment, is Garnacho. And it feels strange because Man United haven't been great recently. Across the season, Garnacho's data isn't perfect, and he doesn't have a lot of what I want. He's not on penalties. He probably won't get 90 minutes every game, although his minutes are going to be very good at the moment. And he's not on set pieces. His goal threat isn't even that good. But he's so cheap, and he is nailed on to start at the moment. And the fixtures for Manchester United coming up are pretty good. And it just gives such an easy route back to Haaland whilst keeping Salah. You probably still can't retain Trent, but you are moving towards a structure where you can get a lot of other big hitters in there if you have a cheap 5th midfielder. Sarabia is another really nice cheap midfielder as well. So I am looking at Garnacho and Sarabia and those players below 5 million. But then 2 other options that are a little bit more expensive but cheaper than Richarlison are Gross and Eze. Gross's data has been really good recently. The fixtures are brilliant for Brighton, as we spoke about. And when João Pedro's not on the pitch, Gross is on penalties, as well as being on set pieces too. There is a lot to like about him, and he's absolutely nailed on. But he also doesn't have the highest goal threat from open play. Eze is really great because when he plays, he is nailed, but he's fit, he's nailed. He's going to be on penalties in the absence of Elise, and I still think he'll get the opportunity to return. His data, even in the absence of Elise, has been pretty good. But bringing him in against Arsenal away for the first fixture, it just feels like the wrong time to be jumping on Eze. So I think at the moment, midfield-wise, Richarlison is my favourite option still, but maybe I'll be put off due to the worries that I spoke about. If it's not Richarlison, Gross is my second favourite option, but I may just go down to Garnacho to just make it so much easier for me to bring Haaland in. Let me know down below what you think. Am I just overthinking it? Should I just move for Richarlison? Or is there some value in maybe going for a cheaper option? Very briefly, before we look at what my team will look like with those 2 planned transfers, the Fantasy Football Hub AI recommended transfers. I like looking at this every week because it's just an algorithm, right? It's not full of emotional biases. They suggest banking the free transfer this week because obviously Powell, Torres and Taylor aren't ruled out. And if they're both fit, I could technically bank the free transfer. It may well be valuable, but I probably won't. They actually recommend not only selling Salah ahead of Son, and the reason for that is he's the more expensive of the 2, and they are considering that they're both possibly out until game week 25. They then recommend Gordon to bring in. They've still got Gordon's projections pretty high, and maybe I'm disregarding Gordon, but the next 2 just aren't ideal. But from game week 23, the fixtures are brilliant for Gordon, so maybe a player that I shouldn't be disregarding, and maybe a player that I should be considering. But I'm not at the moment. If I just finish then with what the team will look like with those 2 planned transfers, this is the situation that we're currently at. It would be a -4 hit. It would give me 2.4 million in the bank, and I would be selling Pau Torres and Son to Estepinian and Richarlison. 2 high upside players that I'm bringing in that have the potential to get attacking returns. I love the fixtures for Estepinian, and it leaves me Taylor, if he does play, as a first bench option. If he doesn't, my bench is nothing. But I do have Salah and Trent still. And like I said, I think there is such value in delaying that decision around what to do with the 2 of them. If I have any other issues crop up, and Taylor's not available, we are starting to move towards either big hit territory, i.e. a -8 or a -12, or potentially wildcard. But I just think there are going to be so many better opportunities to wildcard. I don't like the idea of a free hit this week. It probably would be, if I have another issue that crops up, I'd take a -8. And I think when you start to move towards it's worth a wildcard rather than the hit, is probably when you're looking at you need a -12 or you need a -16. When you get to that stage, then you're like, yeah, maybe it is a week to play a wildcard. But when it's a -4 or -8, I think you just take the hit and you save the chip. So this is the way that the team would look. Let me know what you think of my plan, and let me know what your plan is down below. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 21 team selection. Hopefully you did enjoy it. It was a bit all over the place, so I do apologise, but there's just so much happening at the moment. I will clarify, obviously, on Friday's deadline stream. You will see my final transfers as well, so make sure to tune into that. And there'll also be a deadline decisions video on Friday as well. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.